could say fuck on my show. My show has been canceled a long time ago. Like, I don't know how many years we've been doing this, but it's been a while now. Jeremy might be able to tell us. So we're going to just do this, and you'll get it, and you are going to be on the radio. So it's like nothing you can do about it now. You're already in here. We ready? All right. This is Steve Earle. You're listening to the Steve Earle Show, Hardcore Troubadour Radio and Outlaw Country, coming to you from the Outlaw Country Cruise. It is the last day of the cruise, and reality is going to come really early tomorrow. But we got a pretty big day here. Get to this is I'm doing stuff all the rest of the day. This is my favorite thing that I'm doing today, I think. This is we had the honor of having and some of you have witnessed it. I'm sure all of you have witnessed it. A reunion of the hot band, Emmylou. And that's what we're here to talk about. These are all people that were there, and it's we have Albert Lee. Of course, Rodney, Crowell, and the road mangler himself, Kaufman, who was there for everything. So, I guess start with Emmy and just the hot band. At what point does it come into existence, and who names it the hot band?
Okay, I hope I remember. Well, I guess how far back you want to go. Most of the players, a big bunch of the players, were actually on the records that I did with Graham Parsons.
Right.
And then when I got my record contract,
Mary Martin signed you.
Well, Mary Martin signed me, and kudos to Mary Martin. If you go back on Google or whatever you do and put up, not the one who played Peter Pan.
Not Peter Pan or JR's mama. This is an entirely different.
This is Mary Martin, a mover and a shaker in the music business. She actually put together the band. You know, the band with Leon Helm and all that. She did that was another band.
Yeah, basically when
she managed Leonard Cohen. I mean, she did so many things about Mary's career. But fortunately for me, she was the head of artist relations, and not artist relations, but A&R. I guess. Anyway, she signed me to Warner Reprise, and brought in a wonderful producer, Brian Ahern, both Canadians. And she thought, I needed a good producer, and then I really think it was Brian wanted to record with some of that core of the hot band on my first record, and then it just seemed obvious. Well, maybe not to the record company, but I had a wonderful manager named Ed Tickner who had managed Graham Parsons, and that's why he was my
and the
manager.
Birds.
And Phil knows all about that. And he somehow, he was like a chess master. After they had decided that they would help promote me with tour support, he just said, well, no, if we just add a few little zeros, maybe 10, we could actually afford some really professional players who had a history with playing with, recording with Graham, and recording the albums that I had done. And so that's how I went into my first big debt. However, I would do it all over again. And so we actually had James Burton and Emery Gordy and Glendy Harden, who had played on the last Graham Parsons record. In the meantime, I had met Rodney through Brian Ahern, who was sending me material. We were listening to material to make the record, and I hadn't heard anything he played me that I liked until he played me the cassette of Rodney's, and the rest is kind of history. I had all these great songs. For anybody else who knew who Rodney was, I had him all to myself as being able to get his songs. And he became a part of the hot band. And I believe that we had put out a call to Buddy Emmons, but Buddy had just moved back to Nashville and didn't want to go on the road. So there was this young kid from Staten Island who had been inspired by the Rita Brothers, by the Sweetheart of the Rodeo album.
Right.
which a lot of young guitar players picked up the pedal steel, I think, because of that record. That's what I've heard.
I had that record.
Yeah, Hank, I think it was Linda Ronstadt who knew Hank and gave Hank Eddie Tickner, my manager's number, and he called and showed up at our. Is this going on too long? Because you did ask me the question. Because while
This is the core of this whole show.
right, while we waited for James and Emery and Glendy, who were all on the road with Elvis and Neil Diamond, Rodney and I were the hot band for a few days. 2 rhythm guitar players, 2 lead singers, at a rehearsal studio.
We did 3 gigs, didn't we?
Well, later on, I think. Or was it
Just the
before?
2 of us.
Yeah. So we were the hot band for a while, but it got a little better after we got the whole band together. And and then we did our first gig at the boarding house on April 3rd, 1975. So there.
Yeah. I was a kid that read all the credits on records, for a long time before this record came out. So I knew who a lot of the players were. Like Burton being on this, and that was great. Every Gordy, I learned about from being in this band, and later on backtracking through all the other shit that he had played on. So John Ware was a name I recognized immediately because I love those Toast National Band records, and that's was that he was the
He
drummer.
was with the Bellamy Brothers in the next room rehearsing.
Yeah.
Because Rodney and I were rehearsing the drummers, and it was a disaster. I remember nobody could play a shuffle. And John sort of came in like Superman. I'll rescue this situation. This is it.
Yeah, Emery told me that Emery Gordy produced some of my very first records, co-produced Guitar Town, and actually worked for me before that. He said that his least favorite thing about that gig was when John used brushes, he had to stand really close to the kit, and he played them so hard that pieces of metal flew off of the brushes and fucking hit you. It was like he had to learn to play with pain, So he was pretty fierce, and the way he played brushes, it was sort of. I never saw anybody do that.
John?
Yeah, John. Yeah.
But he actually liked to put a cardboard box, remember, Rodney? Tape it on top of the snare.
A pizza box.
And, well, I think it was a little bit smaller. He actually had a case made for yeah,
You
because
paid
it was a
for that,
special
sure.
sound, the cardboard.
Yeah.
It's the sound of one of these days.
Yeah.
So, Albert, at what point do you become a member of this band? How did that come about?
This is like a year later. I was aware of Graham Nashville, submarine band. And a friend of mine, a producer, writer in England, said, "There's a guy here you should get together with." I was playing with a country band in England. It wasn't very successful, but
Pretty good one, actually.
But I was playing country music, and this guy said, "Hey, there's a guy in town here, been hanging out with the Stones. You should get together with him, And it was Graham, of course, but unfortunately I didn't get to meet him there. It was a few years later that I did get to meet him. I was playing with the Crickets. I was at Jerry Allison's house, and Phil Kaufman came over with Graham, and we were hanging out. And remember, we said, "Well, we're driving to Nashville tomorrow. We're going to do a record," and we almost had Graham persuaded to come with us.
Kidnapped by the road mangler. The fly stickers.
Yeah. Sadly, he'd gone by the time we got back from Nashville. And then we heard the news, which Phil would tell you. But no, I was with, I don't know where, actually I was just about to move back to England because I was with a band called Head, Hands and Feet.
One of the best records ever.
Thank you. And I went to see the hot band a couple of times, and I knew Glendy from the Crickets, and of course, to be honest, I was there to see James, because I'm a huge James Byrne fan, and I love him dearly, So I thought, wow, this band's great, And then a friend of mine said, hey, I'm going to drive down to Laguna Beach to see Emmy and Mark band. You want to come with me? I said, oh, okay, you know. So we drove down there and saw the show, of course, loved it. And went backstage afterwards and, oh, Albert, we were just thinking about you. You know, what are you doing for the next 2 weeks?
Yeah, James, of course, was still technically on the payroll with Elvis Presley. And I think at that point, right, had he decided that that was going to be his last tour with us, he was going to go back to Elvis full time. Do you remember? Because we had talked about Albert as, it was like, who could you possibly replace James Burton with, right? And there he is.
Yeah.
Shows up backstage.
With all due respect and love for James, one of the greatest guitar players. But when Albert entered the band, that's really when it became Albert.
Yeah,
It's like
It went into another stage.
it became a convertible. And
it's a logical replacement for James Burton stylistically, and I'm sure that obviously that you've listened to a lot of James Burton, but it was you were definitely this year's model when you stepped into that song. It was like the afterburner.
It wasn't all playing. The playing was brilliant. But when Albert came, we had a bandmate because James was Elvis's player, so we were kind of, in awe of James.
We were all in awe of him.
And where's Elvis now?
It wasn't. What I'm saying is, Albert was fun to hang out with.
Right, gotcha.
That's true, but I do think that track, so we had done the 2 albums with James and the kind of core that we had, and then getting ready to do the 3rd album, Brian wanted to do this song of Graham's, and of course I was trying to do any of Graham's. Anything connected with Graham, I felt I needed to latch on to kind of continue my education without him there, because, and so Luxury Liner was a kind of little-known song from the Submarine Band, right? Submarine Band, but in Brian's hands, he had this J50 that he put through some kind of device that had that pulse, right? And set the table for Albert. And basically we just said, go man, go.
Yeah, and that solo going out of Luxury Liner is one of the greatest guitar solos ever played. Period.
I have a confession. Thanks to Brian, he pieced it together as some of the best.
They're all pieced together. Everybody comp solos by that time. It's not no reason.
And it changed. I think it added. Now it's really common for country music to try to have an Albert type guitar.
Guitar, yeah.
Everywhere,
Except they then call me.
Yeah, what do that guy is?
Imitation
Thinks
is
he's
the,
Albert, but
what is it, form of flattery, right?
it's so. Did you guys think you were making a country record, or did you even think about that, or did you think it was a country?
I said I want to be a country. That was my thing. I said I want to make a country record, but obviously, I came from more from a folk school,
Right.
So I wasn't going to abandon that. But I just wanted to drench myself.
Right.
And I listened to, George, all those. Rodney and I, when we first met, we would sit around just for hours and sing George and Tammy and Melvin Montgomery and all these duets, country duets. That's how we worked up Sweet Dreams, probably just sitting around at Lonnie Lane, which was the place where the truck was, the recording studio where we were staying at the time, instead of a hotel. We had this crazy house, sort of Esther Williams, Hollywood 50s house that we were renting and recording in a mobile unit. But so everybody was kind of hanging together. And so Rodney and I just sang all the time. And it was always country stuff. Also, I had him captured up there. I would hear every song that he wrote first, so I would get to pick of the litter every time before the world got to know Rodney.
He was writing amazing songs at that point, too. I mean,
Came out of the chute, fully formed.
it's funny, Rod told me a story a couple of days ago, something that he'd never told me before, and that was that he had a few songs that he had written before that he had published with a publisher in Nashville, and he asked for those songs back just as he was leaving to work the gig. And there was a pretty good, what do you remember those songs were, Rod? You told me this, it was pretty amazing.
It would not happen today.
Yeah.
But I told Jerry Reed's manager and publisher, I said, I have this great girl in Canada, and I said, I'm going to go work with her. Would you mind if I take some of my songs? And he said, well, what do you want to take? Pick the ones you want. I said, well, I'll take Till I Gain Control Again, and An American Dream, Song for the Life, and another Bluebird One. Yeah. So all of them, and they recorded immediately. And it's, thank you very much.
And no, that would not happen. That was probably never happened.
It's probably against the law.
It's probably closer to the way things should be, but it's not. Yeah. It's just one of those deals. So, Phil Kaufman, so he works with Graham, obviously, and I did, by the way, I saw the Fallen Angels at Liberty Hall that night that bootleg was recorded. I was there. And
so was Linda Ronstadt and her band showed up one night.
Neil Young, right, she was opening for Neil Young and getting the better reviews.
Don't you correct me.
She don't call me young lady.
Hey, she's always right. But let me just tell you a quick story about the Ballad of Sally Rose. We were doing a show in Rapid City, South Dakota, had a day off, and I asked the clerk at the front desk, where's a good bar that might have some good jukebox? And they said, they said, don't go to the Wagon Wheel because they're all being drunk. The natives get their checks today. So we went straight to that bar. We're sitting there, and this woman who had obviously overserved herself, she comes up and she looks at Emmylou, and she says, I know you. And she says, and I said, of course you do. That's Sally Rose. Sally Rose and the Buds. She said, I got all her records.
Phil Kaufman is Emery Gordy, who was in the hot band and produced he played on all the guitar camera. And we're getting ready to go out, him, Richard Bennett played on the record, and then we get ready to go out and do our first gigs. And Emery obviously wasn't going to go. Richard did, the first few gigs, but Emery wasn't going to. But he did tell me, as close as he came, was he said, if you hire Phil Kaufman as my personal valet, then I'll go on the road. But he has to work for nobody but me.
Yeah, he's a great bass player. What we used to call him, Gun Fu or something. Karate, he used to do his.
Who are we talking about? I'm confused. There are too many names.
What page are we on?
Is Emery?
Emery.
And I think I always got the impression about this band, later as I got to know people, and I met you along the way, and I knew Rodney, I met him just before he got into the band. But, when I got to know Emery and figured out his history, and, then, of course, Glenn Hessley too, Tony Brown comes along, but Emery, especially, a chance for him to play. Was he probably in John Denver's band just before this?
No, he left me for John Denver.
Gotcha.
So did Glenn Hay.
John Denver bought her whole band.
They all got, but we survived. We got some great players to fill in their places.
John Denver was writing the big checks.
Right, I know.
But can I tell you a story about Emery? This is roadie for us. And he actually went along too. I lost him too. Big redheaded guy from Texas, Randy Watson. And it was his job to, Emery said, every night, I want you to tune down one bass string, a half a note, and don't tell me which one it is. Because John would do the same show every night. And for Emery, he was one of the brilliant guys.
Yeah.
And then some people. And he needed to be on his toes. And he kept his attention and kept there. So he, at the first downbeat, he'd figure out which note was tuned down every step. And he'd have to figure out every song. And it would be a different string every night. So,
That's really fucked up. I love every sort of thing. But it makes perfect sense.
He told us a story about working with Roy Orbison. Did you hear that? Where before they went on stage, they tuned up Roy's guitar like a half step up, and he really struck me.
because he already sang really high. Don't get any ideas.
Well, so I got my memory story I want to tell you. It was B. Spears, Willie's bass player. They were in Las Vegas.
Right.
And we were open. So
I saw that tour.
So B says, look, when you go out, and he said, I'll go behind my amp and I'll play. And you go out there and Willie will turn in and see and you never know what's happening. So Emery, the most pristine musician you could ever come across, he goes out there and he's playing Willie's set. B's behind the amp, he starts fucking playing, one bad note.
On purpose.
And Willie's turning and looking like,
He did. It's like Willie Nelson.
he knew what happened.
Yeah, absolutely. I grew up with B, and we literally were about 4 years apart. Well, we went to different high schools that were about like 5 or 6 miles apart. George Chambers, who was my science teacher in high school, was B's science teacher in high school because he transferred from Marshall High School where B was. So he comes from this whole group of people. He was in Johnny Bush's band. He went from Bush's band to Waylon's band to Willie's band, and the reason he had to leave, he ended up leaving Johnny Bush's band because Frenchie Burke hated hippies and just wanted him out of the band. And Frenchie was more valuable evidently, so there was a trade I think made, and he was 19 or 20.
Trade prisoners.
I think there was some sort of transaction between Will and John happened in the middle of the night, and B got sold to Willie.
You remember then B joined Guy's band.
Yeah.
And got going for a little while. And hey, really shrunk considerably.
Yeah.
So Willie hired him back,
I witnessed that. He goes to Bonnie Garner. I was with him. Me and him and Baby Earle, his cousin, were up for about 2 days over at Waylon's office. And he just decided he had a girlfriend in Las Vegas and couldn't afford to fly to see her anymore. So he just decided he couldn't take it. So we go to Bonnie's office because she was at Sunday. Because after Lone Star Records, Willie's label ended, that he agreed to shut the label down, but they had to hire Bonnie, and she became an A&R person there. So we go to Bonnie's office, and he says, Bonnie, I want to go home. And so Bonnie tracks Willie down the road and gets him on the phone. There's no cell phones at this point. Puts me on the phone and says, Willie, yeah, I want to come back. And he goes, well, meet us in so-and-so. Bonnie will get you a tip. And he goes, what about Chris? Because Chris Etheridge was in the band. He goes, we got 2 drummers, we'll have 2 bass players.
Right.
And they did for about a year.
That's the Willie Nelson philosophy.
Absolutely.
There's always room on the bus.
That's it. That's why it's called Willie Nelson Family.
The last time that Emmylou did our last tour with Willie Nelson, been on the road for a couple of years, and this same thing we had talked about before, where Mickey Raphael says, "Go on out here." I had a buck knife, and I would go on stage with the buck knife, and Mickey's behind the amp, doing the thing, and I'm doing all, and Willie's looking over at me, and And I'm just, he's playing Georgia. And right in the middle of that, Tony Brown comes on all fours.
The baby buffalo.
The baby buffalo. Right in the middle of the set. I'm playing him. Willie's got me on a buck knife. He's got Tony Brown. This is our last show, really.
This is not going to work on the radio unless I set this up a little bit. Tony Brown, who was the piano player in the hot band, and he had been, he was in Elvis's band. He was like, he produced
a small guy.
My first record. He's a little guy.
He looked like he stepped over a wedding cake.
Curly hair, and he had kind of an afro going. And he did this thing when he had reached a certain blood alcohol level that was pretty predictable, called the baby buffalo. He would get down on his knees and his elbows, and he would go across the room at a frightening amount of speed. And just knock over anything in his path. That's the baby buffalo.
That's probably why I was on last gig with Willie.
It was, the worst baby buffalo I saw was after he was an executive at MCA Records. The baby, after a period of relative, sameness, Vince Gill was sitting in with Ralph Stanley at the station inn. You may have been there, but it was a big deal for Vince. He's going to play with Ralph Stanley. So we're all down there, and the baby buffalo came out at the after. Bruce Hinton was horrified and used it for blackmail for the rest of Tony's career at MCA. Kind of reset the end from that point. I also know the Tony Brown story, and I can't remember who told. I think Emery must have told the story about Tony's sleep was a sleepwalker. He was a somnambulist. He would and you wouldn't know that he was asleep. His eyes would be open, but he was literally wouldn't remember it the next day. But I heard a story about you and Bill and maybe somebody else being off the bus at a truck stop, and Tony gets off the bus and walks in, and he's sound asleep. And Emery said, y'all knew he was asleep, but nobody else did. And just kind of watch him trying to figure out what he was going to do, whether you should wake him up. And he walks over to the jukebox, and he stands there for, a long time. And he fishes out a quarter, and he puts it in, and he plays Wipe Out.
Glenn D. Hard was the most impeccable dresser when he went through customs, they'd bring people over to the show. They couldn't believe how neat his band. Everything was was nicely wrapped. And I lost my train of thought.
Well, because he was so neat. Were you talking about the smoking jacket?
Yes.
Glenn D. on the bus.
And going into the truck stop.
And he went, well, he was used to being flown in a private plane with them. So now we run this funky bus. And, but he would put on a smoking jacket, and he walked into a truck stop. This is before they had salad bars in the truck stop.
It was a really tough,
And he walked in, and everybody turned and stared at him, and he said, "Karate, anyone?"
In his slippers and robe.
Best gig, best hot band gig. Anybody got anything on that best hot band?